This is an audio sample of The Case of the Missing Boat Captain by Terry M. Bethel. Prologue. The arrival. 2 o'clock on Wednesday morning, the yellowing street lights flickered as the crescent moon slipped behind a bloated grey cloud. Everyone in the old waterfront neighborhood was fast asleep. Even the noisy dogs, known for barking through the night, slept. A group of people calling themselves Friends of Haiti were told to prepare for a landing. It was now up to them to ensure the passengers were safely collected. The captain of a Haitian sloop had anchored in a nearby cove waiting for nightfall. By morning, another boatload of illegal immigrants was scheduled to make landfall on South Beach. Though the captain had many successful trips in the past, the last attempt to bring in a boatload of illegal immigrants from Haiti had failed miserably. Tonight was tranquil, not much breeze blowing as it usually did off the quaint coastal community. It was perfect conditions for a landing. The tide was low, so there was not even the sound of the gentle waves lapping on the rocks. The flat sand would disappear in a few hours as the tide made its way back to the shoreline. By then, the birds would be out singing their usual gleeful tunes to the early risers. If everything went according to plan, no one would know that there was a landing. The landings were not always in the same place, but South Beach had become a hotspot for illegal trafficking. Cars and trucks quietly pulled up with their lights off, lining the streets through various corners and awaiting a signal to collect the new arrivals. It was an arrangement that worked pretty well for years now, with only the occasional slip-up. People in the Haitian communities deep in the Bahamian bushes prepared for the new arrivals, hoping that it was their loved ones who made it through. Melissa knew her daughter was expected on this trip. Her brother had called to say that he had put her on the boat. She hadn't seen Layla in 14 years. Melissa worked hard, but her money was meager. Nonetheless, she, like most people in their hidden community, saved what they could, sending money, clothes, pots, and whatever they could get their hands on to their families. Now 26 years of age, Layla could not wait to see her mother any longer. Like many of the young Haitian immigrants, she saw her trip to the Bahamas as a stopover before going into the United States. Layla planned on taking another boat to Florida if she could convince her mother to join her. It would be a matter of hours now before Layla, Melissa, and the rest of the family would be together again. The only thing holding them up was a signal from the captain, clearing them to approach their landing area. The plan was set, and a small bonfire was lit as a signal to guide the wooden sloop towards South Beach on the southern coast of New Providence in the Bahamas. The trek was an easy one for the captain. He had made the voyage a number of times, transporting weapons and human cargo to the islands from Haiti. None of the passengers knew the real identity of their captain, but to his current shipmates, he was known as Captain Rooster, though they dare not utter his name for fear of losing their lives. Rooster was a man with wild eyes and an appetite for making money. He was known to be cruel. He was tall, medium-built, and probably in his mid-40s. Human life only had value if he was making money from it. Rooster took chances most boat captains would not. He thought himself invincible, a man who would always defy death. The month before, Rooster had only made it as far as Ragged Island. A storm had brewed, forcing him to seek shelter in the chain of islands. Despite slipping between two keys, the wooden sloop reeled from side to side, nearly breaking in half. It was dark, and the seas raged ferociously, swallowing everything that was cast into the watery grave. In order to save the boat, all personal belongings were thrown overboard. "Give me everything you have. Everything must go to save the boat. We must calm the seas. Please, please." He urged them to hurry in Creole. The captain's helper reached in and grabbed the belongings as they were passed to him, placing them on deck as the second helper tossed them into the ocean. Lighting of any kind was forbidden when close to land to avoid detection by neighboring residents, fishing boats, and patrol vessels. It was not uncommon for the Haitian immigrants to be found and escorted back to Haiti or arrested and placed in the detention center until deportation. With the weight of the passengers and the shipment, Captain Rooster had thought that his boat was certain to go under. Rather than losing his cargo, He ordered his 2 crewmen to throw the 50 passengers overboard, including the women. It was the only way he knew how to save his shipment of guns, which to him were more valuable than his passengers. Rooster was aware that there would be another group at any one of the docks in Haiti, waiting for their chance to escape Haiti. "We are close to land now. This is where you will get off the boat." There was a fresh wave of cries because no one wanted to leave the boat in such weather. "Come, I will help you." One by one, as the passengers crawled from the belly of the boat, they were pushed overboard into the dark churning sea. Howling winds eventually swallowed the terrifying screams of the people as they tried to resist the order to jump into the cold, dark, tempestuous ocean. "Anway, supple." Passengers pleaded in their native tongue. Their desperate cries for help fell on deaf ears. Rooster's men knew that if they did not follow the captain's instructions, they too would be sinking in the depths of the churning ocean. Even a strong swimmer was unlikely to survive the choppy seas. By morning, the shores of the little ragged island community were sprinkled with the bodies of the immigrants who were told they had reached the end of their journey. As far as Rooster was concerned, they made it to the Bahamas. He had honored his part of the agreement. With their money in his pocket and the shipment of guns safe, he would secure the weapons on one of the uninhabited keys until his return. Now the heartless Captain Rooster was back with another group of people who were desperate for a new life. Their eyes were bright with anticipation, their hearts racing, not knowing if they would actually make it to safety. They were sternly briefed not to make a sound. To do so would wake the residents and alarm the police. With the tide low and the moon obscured with the passing clouds, the immigrants made their way across the sandy banks with their little sacks in hand to waiting vehicles. As the passengers were being offloaded on one side of the boat, a Boston whaler had quietly pulled up on the other side to take on the cargo of guns. The exchange of money and guns was complete, but Rooster realized his money was short. Only the top bills were real. All others were just cut pieces of paper. His buyers grinned as they attempted to shove off from the sloop knowing they had ripped him off. Rooster quickly reached for his weapon but was not as fast as his shady customers. 2 shots were fired. One grazed Rooster's arm, and the other hit the boat. At the sound of the gunshots, the passengers screamed and ran for safety. Some made it to the awaiting vehicles while others ran into the bushes as the cars and trucks took off before the police arrived. Within minutes, the place was clear. No one was in sight. The only evidence of a landing was the sloop that had been abandoned moments before. With the dogs still asleep, the immigrants hid, hoping to be rescued before daybreak. Chapter 1. Haiti. Pierre's country was a nation nestled in the Caribbean Sea on the island of Hispaniola. It shared its land with another nation, the Dominican Republic. Haiti was a country of stunning landscape and incredible beauty. Pierre Petithomme viewed his homeland as a treasure trove of industry and talent set in the Caribbean. Pierre was right. Haiti's lush waterfalls, winding rivers and seascapes, charming colonial buildings, and hard-working craftsmen were the pride of the region despite its political confusion. Although areas of the country were thick with greenery, there were not many trees in the heavily populated areas where most of the Black Haitians lived. Their environment was dreary. The major cities were home to makeshift, shantytowns with abject poverty. Jobs were scarce, and necessities were considered a luxury. Haiti was a nation plagued with money problems and natural disasters, the deadliest disaster being François Duvalier. François Duvalier began his career as a quiet country doctor who wanted to help his people when he first became involved in politics. Once elected president in 1957, François, also known as Papa Doc, was overcome with greed and decided he would be president until his death, which came in 1971. Duvalier ruled with an iron fist. He practiced the nation's religion of voodoo and became a menacing tyrant who led his nation by inflicting fear. Anyone opposing Papa Doc suffered at the hands of his private guard he called the Tun-Tun Makouts. Just as the nation's trees had been cut away over the years, Haiti had been purged of anyone who dared to disagree with the country's leader. Men and women were cut down without a second thought. This meant mass killings of politicians, intellectuals, and business people. The result was the exodus of thousands of skilled people leaving the island. Some left by plane, and some fled on foot across the border to their neighbors in the Dominican Republic. Others boarded less than seaworthy vessels, braving the vast ocean in search of freedom and means to provide for their loved ones. Anyone leaving Haiti did so not because they didn't love their land or their people but because of desperation for a better quality of life. For the poor black Haitians who remained, work was almost non-existent. Those who could afford to own businesses were often heavily taxed by the government or friends of the government. Corruption had become a lifestyle that was not about to change. The once beautiful tropical nation of Haiti had become a playground for political corruption, and the country was unstable. The murders of people who opposed the politicians and the sudden departure of successful business persons put a brain drain on the nation. Many of those who stayed behind fearfully looked up to their president. Haiti's population was a mixture of blacks, whites, and mulattoes. The mulattoes were descendants of the former white slave owners and their black slave women. History had set the pace, placing the whites just above the mulattoes. The mulattoes were considered a class higher than the blacks, who made up much of the population. The caste system, the separation of classes, was encouraged by the American government years before. The Americans helped Haiti to bring some order to the land by assisting them with money for development. One of the conditions from the United States government was that the mulattoes were to lead the country. That was the case until Papa Doc's era. The mulatto population was not eagerly accepted by the whites or the blacks, but they inherited a share of land to provide for their families. Despite the social setbacks, some pressed their way into society through the doors of courtship, like Josephine de Beauharnais, the wife of French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte, and others through dedicated labor. Though the mulattoes considered life challenging, it was nothing compared to the rigorous life of the black masses. It was the peasant blacks who felt the weight of poverty on their backs as they struggled day and night to earn meager wages. While some blacks had an education which provided better opportunities, the majority struggled in their poverty. Pierre Petillon was a hard-working black man who, without a formal education, worked hard for a day's wage. Pierre worked as a groundskeeper for a wealthy mulatto on a sugar cane plantation. Mr. Benoit was his name. Mr. Benoit treated Pierre well despite the racial tension in the country. Loyalty to Mr. Benoit was a trait he was proud of. Pierre had no desire to leave his beloved country. He believed that the rampant corruption was doing more harm to Haitian families than good. All he wanted was to work an honest day's work and receive a fair pay. He did not agree with the widespread crime that had plagued innocent, well-meaning people. Chapter 2. A menacing plot. One day while securing the boundary to Mr. Benoit's plantation, Pierre overheard a plot by some of the workers. The workers knew that Mr. Benoit was not due back until the following day and had left his wife and 5 children at home until his return. The plan was to kidnap 15-year-old Justine and hold her for ransom. Whether the ransom was paid or not, their intention was to sell her to an international human trafficking ring. Justine would fetch a good sum of money with the traders. She was a beautiful girl. She had soft, curly, brown hair that nearly made it to her waist. Her eyes were green like her mother's, a white native of France. White girls with blonde hair were a premium in the human trafficking circles. If the kidnappers got her, they would bleach her hair blonde and fetch top dollar for her. There was much unrest in the entire nation. The influence of corrupt government leaders spilled down through the ranks and rested squarely on some groups who felt that their only means of survival was to steal from the rich in order to survive. As a result of the crime wave, many investors cut their losses and fled the country. Crime was high, but Mr. Benoit loved his country. He stayed and paid his workers well. He would not dream they would repay him by causing harm to his family. Pierre sneaked away from the men. To be found by them would mean certain death. The police were too far away to be notified, and Pierre could not trust their possible involvement in the scheme. The sun was now going down behind the cane stalks, and he could hear the children playing in the yard a short distance away. Pierre knew he had to get to them before the men did. Without knowing who in the household he could trust, he concluded that he had to send them all away. As Pierre made his way towards the children, he was disheveled with beads of sweat pouring down his face, his eyes filled with distress. He was generally quiet, composed, and worked without much of a fuss. Mrs. Benoit caught his eye from the kitchen window and came running out to meet him. She knew something was terribly wrong. As Pierre was about to explain, he could hear a jeep making its way up the rocky road towards the main house. "Inside, children. Get inside quickly," he said sternly in Creole. Mrs. Benoit grabbed up the two youngest of the five, 3-year-old Jean-Paul and his twin sister Isabelle, and ran up the stairs into the house. "Quickly," he said to the older kids. "Unlock the doors and windows. Do not come outside." Justine and her two younger sisters followed hurriedly behind their mother. Pierre did not have to tell the house staff to leave. When they sensed a commotion, they grabbed up their belongings and left through the back door without a word. The cane stalks shook where they had made their path of escape through the fields. All left except Jasmine, the Benoit's housekeeper of almost 20 years, who helped Mrs. Benoit get the children inside. "Pierre, come inside." Pierre turned and looked at Mrs. Benoit banging on the glass window for him to come inside the house. He knew if he had moved at this point for them to open the door, the bandits would follow behind. "Hide the children," he shouted over the noise of loud voices as the kidnappers drove even closer to the step where Pierre stood. It was not customary for a black worker to give the boss's wife any instruction, but there was no time for protocol if he was going to stop any harm from coming to them. Mr. Benoit had built a cellar into the 2-story stucco house that was accessible only from the inside. Access to the area was also concealed so that anyone who was unfamiliar with the house would not know how to get in. Mrs. Benoit ushered the children down into the cellar with Jasmine. On the way down, she remembered the shotgun her husband kept in his study. "Take them, Jasmine. Keep them quiet and lock the door." Jasmine did as her mistress had told her, though her eyes begged her to join them. "Yes, was all she could manage to utter through her lips. Mrs. Benoit took the shotgun and ran to a window on the northwestern side of the house where the men were. The wood-planked floorboards squeaking with each step she made. The lights were off in the room and the curtains closed. She stooped and peeked through a small opening, hoping she would not be seen. The push-up window was cracked open just enough for her to hear what was being said. Two of the men had now come out of the dusty, army green vehicle that looked as if it had been spray-painted by a child. They began to taunt Pierre. She could smell the pungent scent of liquor mixed with stale sweat coming from the men every time the wind blew in her direction. Mrs. Benoit recognized the 3 men in the jeep as her workers. The other 2 she did not know. "Listen," Pierre tried to reason with the young men. "You don't really want to do this, eh? Why don't you men turn around and leave the property, and we will pretend this didn't happen?" You have just listened to an audio sample of The Case of the Missing Boat Captain. Copies of this book are available in Nassau, Bahamas at Logos Bookstore, in Eleuthera at Office General, the North Eleuthera Craft and Snack Place opposite the airport, and on Amazon.com. Get your copy today.